here with Stephen Johnson, MD of Shawbrook Bank, and Stephen and I were chatting offline, we kind of came up with an interesting sort of discussion actually, because we've identified that in 2017 we'll see actually kind of what I'm calling 3 tiers of landlords, and it's going to change the dynamic of the private rented sector in the respect that we've got unencumbered landlords, we've got incorporated landlords, and then we've got sole trader, highly leveraged landlords that are going to be significantly impacted by Section 24. And Stephen, I think it's interesting to consider that those landlords are all going to be in competition with each other.
Yeah, I guess you raise an interesting point about you've now got a very different economics for those landlords, and they also have very different ability to raise finance. So you see that manifests itself in different type of competition when you're looking to buy a property. If you're up against somebody who's got an incorporated vehicle that can raise more finance than someone who's chosen not to go down that route, will they be at a competitive advantage in a bidding process? You've also got kind of cash investors who actually may find that the new underwriting standards make it a lot harder for investors who are looking to raise external finance. They may be advantaged. So yeah, it's interesting to think a bit through the lens of people trying to bid for property and how they'll be able to do that. I think from the other lens, I guess, how does that manifest itself in rental strategies and rental levels that landlords look to set for their portfolios? And it's kind of, I guess, the debate about does the landlord set the rent relative to his kind of costs, or does he actually just have to take the rent that the market will bear? Yeah. And the reality is, depending on the local supply and demand, ultimately, the market will set the rental price. And therefore, I think landlords need to be careful about if they think they have the ability to vary it just because their costs have gone up. Because you may end up, in a scenario where you have prolonged void periods. You may end up in a scenario where you take a tenant who's desperate, who can't afford it, and with the changes that are happening around the lettings agency market and the quality of those tenants, that could lead to to tenant arrears and the worst case for a scenario for a landlord where you've got a tenant in the property that's not paying you and you can't get possession of your asset again, but you've still got all your costs to manage. So I think it's an interesting thing to reflect upon, and I guess we'll just have to see how the market develops. But when you step back and look at the overall housing market, the outlook and the forecasts are all very supportive of continuing to see a reasonable amount of growth in rental levels. Home ownership remains very unaffordable, and there's some consultation out recently about what the role the mortgage market is playing in home ownership, and the fact that post MMR we've effectively seen the mortgage market shrink to serve a certain part of the population, and become increasingly harder if you're not in that section of the market to actually get finance. So we've got a changing housing market in the UK as well. But rental levels look like they can sustain some modest growth. But I'd caution people to think that they can demand rents out of line with kind of what the market's willing to pay.
I think you're right to do that, because ultimately I believe that the Section 24 sole trader highly leveraged landlord, if they push rents up, then incorporated landlords and unencumbered landlords, they're not going to be forced to do that. So there is going to be this second tier of more affordable rents from that type of landlord, and clearly that exposes, as you already said, the Section 24 landlord to even more risk, because they could potentially be undercut.
Yeah, So I think that's a plausible scenario. So I think people need to be. I think the message then for it, people just need to be thoughtful about where they think they can set rental levels, and it's not not necessarily in the gift of the landlord to set that. It's the markets. So I guess it adds even more importance to really understanding what's happening in your local market, what's happening with local demand and supply. We've already seen the impact Airbnb has had in terms of removing supply from the rental market, and therefore probably inflating rents, which is one of the suggestions. So the markets are fluid, and landlords just need to stay close to their local demographics, really.
Do you think there's anything that the highly leveraged landlord can do to be able to remain competitive? I mean, clearly they should review perhaps their existing portfolios, see if they can restructure or go on to more favourable, efficient products, that kind of thing. They should actually be being quite proactive in what they're going to be doing in this regard.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that is the message, and it has been the message for some time. but people just need to truly understand the impact that it's going to have on them. And then they can take appropriate steps. Now, the work that we've done, the research we've done with our customers, the number one option has been, well, we'll reflect it in rents. Well, we've just spoken at some length about, well, is that actually available? It's an option, but it may not be available if the market won't demand it. We have seen a lot of liquidity in the buy-to-let and the funding market, so pricing has become quite, has improved quite materially. So actually, there might be some refinancing opportunities for landlords on their back book to reduce the cost of their debt. They may want to look at other efficiencies in terms of how they manage their portfolio. Ultimately, we have seen anecdotally some evidence of people selling. We see it in sort of some of our existing clients redeeming loans, and in some cases that may be the best option. If you are highly geared across the portfolio, selling one or two properties just to de-gear the rest of the portfolio may be the right choice for you. I think it's good to take advice. Consult with a professional advisor, professional broker, just to understand. Also how the financing market now works with the new underwriting standards. But having a health check, just to, I think is always good practice. And some people, roll off into SVRs and higher rate products, and this is the time that you kind of want to make sure you're optimizing your financing costs as well as any other costs in your business.
Very good advice. I think, we've heard in the autumn statement that lettings agents' fees are going to be banned, which could potentially be passed on to landlords. And, I want to, and I'm interested to know if you join me in this, is say to landlords, they shouldn't automatically reach to put up rents as a solution to these issues, and obviously Section 24 straight away, because I think they should be looking for other efficiencies first. Otherwise, they are going to potentially expose themselves to rents that aren't competitive, and, as you said, experience voids. And there's so much anti-landlord sentiment around at the moment that to constantly have landlords on the social web saying, I'm putting up rents, I'm putting up rents, I'm putting up rents, it doesn't do the landlord community any favours. Do you agree that landlords should be sort of circumspect about what they're writing in the public domain?
Oh, I definitely think so. I mean, you should be under no illusion that housing in the UK is a big issue. The fundamental supply-demand mismatch, the unaffordability of home ownership, is a big issue for our society, and we're seeing home ownership concentrated in older generations. You're seeing a lot younger groups of demographic society not able to go on the housing ladder. That's an issue for our society. Obviously, that manifests itself sometimes in a dispute between homeowners and landlords. Is it landlords that are profiteering from that, or is it and obviously that gets amplified. Whereas the real issues are kind of what is our long-term housing strategy for the UK? We just haven't got one that matches supply and demand at the moment. So I think it's a big issue, and landlords absolutely. We want a professional private rented sector.
Yes.
The level of PRS we've now got in UK housing, I can only see it increasing. I think in some ways that community has a job to do it well, to do it professionally, and to provide that kind of flexibility. I think there's, a lot of people would want to be homeowners. That's absolutely fine, but then there's definitely a core part or a time in your life when renting is the right option for you as well. And we want it to be professional, we want it to be accepted as an important part of the housing market. And I think landlords have got a duty to make sure, that they act responsibly and professionally, because in all things, it's sometimes the minority that sort of make it difficult for the majority. When you come back to the rent setting where you set the rent levels, I think, you think about the risk in that. I know a number of customers who will actually price it slightly below market rent because they think they've got a choice of a broader range of tenants, better quality tenants, going to stay longer, can look after my property. And actually, for the slightly marginal gain I can get on the rent, it's not worth it because I've got a better quality of tenant. And conversely, if you're ever trying to take the highest rent point in the market, you're likely to be stretching someone's affordability. So could that manifest itself in, non-payment in arrears, in voids? So I think, with lettings fees, landlords should think about, actually, maybe I should absorb that cost, because if I do it properly, I'm going to get a good long-term tenant. And actually, in the overall scheme of my economics, £300, whatever the number is, to sort of do an appropriate job of vetting tenants is probably worth it.
Yeah. Very, very good advice. And just to finish, I guess we're talking about this dynamic of the three different types of landlords, and I don't think we've ever had this in the private rented sector before. And to my mind, the unencumbered landlord is definitely king in all of this, and they, ironically, may end up hoovering up properties from distressed, highly leveraged landlords who can't continue in the sector. So very interesting times ahead.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the unencumbered landlord is still, the vast majority of the landlord community in Paris, according to sort of data. Also, you look at the yields now in property relative to what you're getting in savings account, and relatively, even though the yields are sort of been falling, they're on a relative basis more attractive than they probably have been for some time. So, yeah, it's interesting to sort of see how that market will play out. And some of those unencumbered landlords may decide now's the right time for me to actually raise a bit of financing and gear, and actually I've got a competitive advantage against my peer set, and I can move quicker and I can negotiate better deals. I can get some of the better properties in the market. So, it'll be interesting to see how that market sort of shifts, and it's not always easy to predict exactly how that'll play out, but you can see, you can definitely see quite clearly segmented landlord groups, and their economics are going to look different, their ability to fund is going to look different. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the market.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much for joining me for this insight into differing and changing landlord demographics and interesting times ahead.